Well, with electricity in South Africa becoming increasingly scarce, how can we ensure that the energy we do have is used efficiently? That's exactly what the Green Building Council of South Africa has been trying to figure out, along with all the other things that they focus on. Now, along with the French Embassy, on Tuesday, they brought together regulatory bodies, financial institutions, and energy experts to explore the drive for energy-efficient buildings and technology. Joining me to discuss some more of the outcomes of the Energy Efficiency in Buildings Conference is the Green Building Council for South Africa's Mthobisi Masinga. Mthobisi joining us virtually from Johannesburg. Thank you so much for your time. This conference could not have been more timely as if you look at the pressures and the challenges that ordinary South Africans, but especially those in various sectors like in the building industry, are facing as a result of these rolling blackouts. How high up on the agenda was South Africa's electricity crisis at this gathering this past week?
Hi, Marcel, and hi to all the listeners. I think it was quite critically high. It was the drive of the whole conversation behind energy and energy efficiency, and how do we get to that net zero, let alone net positive as a nation from an energy front in buildings, in our operations. And of course, ultimately, we want to get to that point where we have a surplus of energy, and of course focusing on renewables as well. So it was a prime focus and anchored upon technologies and behavioral change, which I'll touch into shortly.
When you're talking about, or let me start here. When I saw the press release being released about this conference that was coming up, I thought, when I started reading about your organization, I think you started back in 2007, I thought that it would be welcomed as a nice to have. Oh, these nice fancy buildings going up in Sandton, the green buildings are the ones with all the pretty green plants that are coming out of the vents, that are reusing their water and that kind of thing. But it has really progressed since then, hasn't it? Especially the work that your building is doing. It is no longer a nice to have. New buildings going up and even old buildings being revamped. It is something that touches the bottom line of all these businesses, doesn't it?
Definitely so, because if you're looking at it this way, almost half of all the energy consumed in the world is taken up by buildings. And a large chunk of us, I am in a building myself, you are in a building. People watching or streaming this are in buildings. We work in buildings, we live in buildings, we eat in buildings, we sleep in buildings, we get born in buildings, we die in buildings, we have parties in buildings. The emphasis on buildings being the low-hanging fruit, they also are the low-cost emissions. There is a really, really great effort or a great need or a chord that we need to focus on buildings regarding that. And having said that, 40%, when I mentioned earlier on, I was talking about the energy consumption, but 40% of the global GHG emissions comes from buildings themselves. So if we can target buildings, we're almost 40% to almost 50% towards our net zero carbon target ambitions that have been set before us by the Paris Agreement.
Now, your focus when you presented at the conference was looking at the policy front, which one realizes when you're talking about the Paris Accord and all these international agreements, it's nothing without policy being put in place by especially our developed and South Africa being a developing nation. Where are we at in terms of South Africa's policy towards green building and energy efficiency?
Sure, we've really come a long way as a country. We currently have the Carbon Tax Act. It was put on hold, of course, earlier on in April 2020 by the president because it was part of the COVID tax relief measures that were put in place, to take strain off the economy. And I believe right now it's moving towards full effect again. So the Carbon Tax Act is the polluter pays principle. You pollute more, you pay more in your taxes. It's kind of like it works in tandem with Section 12L of the Income Tax Act that gives you additional allowances on your energy savings. So for every kilowatts of energy you save, you get 95 cents in your savings back. So, both two work on that carrot and stick approach, where the carrot is the reward and the stick is for bad behavior, being, the polluter pays principle. So we've really, really come far as a country. We've got the National Development Plan. We've got the Integrated Resources Plan. We've got the National Energy Efficiency Strategy. So we've got really a lot of policies that are aligned to, global targets and targets for ourselves as a country. So I think we're at that stage now. I mean, as well, in full effect now is the EPCs, being the energy performance certificates, for energy audits in public and private sector buildings. And that's also a project and program that we're part of as the GBCSA in partnership with UK Pact. And this is also, which is a great thing, it's feeding into the green economy, it's upskilling. These are jobs of the future. These are green jobs during this green recovery coming out of COVID. We really, really need a great emphasis towards, creation of more sustainable jobs of the future. And this is one way of doing it. The low-hanging fruits, energy efficiency. Of course, let's not forget water, because water on its own is a crisis. So yeah, definitely we're in the right track.
I was quite interested in the numbers quoted by your CEO in an interview that she did elsewhere a short while ago, saying that your organization has handed out 905 certifications since 2009. And now you think, oh, but that's a drop in the ocean. But then she broke it down and spoke about how that equates to approximately over 1,000 million kilowatts of hours per annum, over 1 million kilograms of carbon that have not gone out into the atmosphere, and over 1,000 million liters of drinking water has been saved as well. Do you feel that the energy efficiency sphere, or organizations such as yourself, do you think that your communication and the language and the narrative that you're putting out there about why the work you do is so important is hitting the right chord? Should we be putting more emphasis on those kinds of numbers, really breaking down what your work is doing, and then you're not just handing out a certificate that somehow a business can claim back when it's tax season?
Great question to ask. And part and parcel of my role is that the stakeholder engagement, the partnerships, the collaborations. It goes without saying that the work that we do is premised on advocacy and various advocacy approaches in South Africa, and of course the ones that we do outside South Africa as well. But what's very, very important is to walk this journey together, because ultimately, we're going beyond green buildings. Buildings are part and parcel of the urban fabric, part and parcel of urban metabolism, the flows of infrastructure, and that intertwined relationship between those various mechanisms. So it's very, very important that we work together, strategically assist one another, because ultimately we're trying to kill the silo approach towards achieving net zero, towards achieving the sustainable, efficient economies, communities, and of course, having a built environment that responds to the health and well-being of people, and responds to the environment itself. So yes, we are doing a lot, but are we doing enough? There's always room for improvements. There's never enough that you can do. So we definitely are working with the governments, from national to provincial to local governments. One of the messages passed on in the office of the MEC in Gauteng at the events was, the work that we were doing together, because they're members with us. And, one of the great things that's coming out of Gauteng, as well as you mentioned, is that there's going to be 5 independent power producers coming out of Gauteng in 2024. Let alone the Western Cape is also already right now focusing on, almost at a stage of going out on tender, looking for independent power producers. So there lies a huge opportunity in the crisis. There's always room for opportunity and innovation when we find ourselves with a problem or with crisis, when we put our heads together and get cracking with the work and assist one another in these journeys.
I was quite interested that you mentioned the work that needs to be done at community level. Now, you and I both know that the vast majority of South Africans are living in communities and buildings that were built at a time with not much care for the lived environments for the majority of South Africa. How are we doing in communicating to how people can make their homes, if they call it their home, whether they own it or not, many South Africans don't, can make their homes more energy efficient? Because that too could make a huge contribution to this ongoing battle, couldn't it?
Definitely. It goes without saying, I think if we do that, we're already halfway there, because if we can have this ideology that can translate into a framework of sustainable human settlements, or energy efficient human settlements, and actually put it down in a 10-point checklist, perhaps do this, do that, change your LED lights. And fortunately enough, as the Green Building Council South Africa, we've been involved in projects like that in low-income areas. One of our projects was back in 2011 in Cato Manor in Durban, where we retrofitted a street of houses and, from an energy efficiency and water efficiency perspective. So there's definitely work to be done. That was communicated well. It was in partnership with, as well, the provincial government and some other stakeholders from in Europe. So I think there's room for that, and we need to work together between the private sectors, NGOs, international organizations, donors, and the public sector to really put that message across in addressing this, because at least if we can address this, we getting rid of the problem, especially for people that cannot afford. So there's always ways that we can save energy, LED lighting, water sensitive taps that have pressure release, so that we're not abusing water, because a lot of us really do abuse water. So it's very, very important, and the education behind that. I think educating people is very important, so that capacity building and skills transfer, not just adding technology and not informing people and not empowering people on how to take care of the technology and how to use the technology, and of course, very important, how to maintain the technology themselves. So that's how we build an economy of means, and we build a nation that is anchored on education and transformation.
That sounds like a conversation we can have completely separately, but thank you so much for your time this evening. The Green Building Council of South Africa's Mthobisi Masinga joining us live there from Johannesburg with